Hey guys, my name's Casey and I'm a jeweler by trade. I work with precious metals and as well as stone setting. So, jewelry in America is one of those industries where everything for the most part is still manufactured. And it's not necessarily outsourced to overseas for it to be created and then resold to other stores. The project I'm working on right now is a class ring, and I just want to show everybody the process from start to finish. And this is straight right from casting, and I'm just removing the top layer of the metal, and that way it's going to be much easier for me to sand and then eventually polish. Because the top layer can be very, very rough, and so I need to remove all those deep scratches and extra metal and things like that. Otherwise, I'm going to be sanding for a very long time, which is not what I want. The metal I'm using for this ring is sterling silver, and most class rings usually are palladium, which is just a fancy word for stainless steel. Now, palladium class rings, they usually run around $200 to $250. Versus silver, you'd be looking around $250 to $300. So the difference is $150 to $100. I'm sorry, $50 to $100. And which is not too bad considering silver's a precious metal. And now I do highly suggest silver just because the value will always increase in time. Precious metals usually do. Now with palladium, not so much. It's not going to increase not as drastically as precious metals will. At the time of this recording, that's what the prices we're looking at. So don't quote me 100% on the price, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how much they're going to cost. So I'm just using a cylinder rotary cutter to remove some of the bumps that can get in the inside from the casting process. And that way I can get this ring to the correct ring size. Otherwise, if I don't, it's gonna distort the inside a little bit. But here we have it all the way smooth, and I'm just gonna round it out completely and get it down to the size that I need. And I'm using a rawhide mallet. That's because it's soft enough to where it will move the metal that I need, but not too harsh that it's going to create dents in it. With casting any ring, they tend to shrink a little bit. That's why I have to make sure it's at the correct size. So here, I'm just using some sandpaper to sand the top of the ring just to get it ready for polishing later on. What I'm using right now is a super tiny round cutter. And basically I'm just crisping up all the edges and taking care of some of the finer details. And this should not be overlooked because the design and the lettering has to stand out. Otherwise, a class ring won't look as good as it could be. And sometimes with the casting process, it can kind of blend the pieces and the lettering and the design a little bit. So I'm just making sure that people can read it from looking at the ring. The stone I'm going to be setting for this ring is a Mozambique Garnet. This is originally from Africa, in the country from Mozambique. These are the very dark, deep red garnets. And garnets actually come in multiple colors, which is pretty cool. And if you happen to have a birthday in January, this is your birthstone. This stone is 4 carats, which is enormous. And I highly recommend garnets, not only because they just come in a lot of different variety of colors, but they're a really good price and they're just so affordable compared to a ruby. For a ruby, a 1 carat, that's gonna be like only just a fourth of the size of this stone. You'd be looking at around 3,000 US dollars. And rubies, they're great for wedding rings or just your own personal ring, but I highly suggest for class rings, I think a garnet is definitely the way to go. So the reason why the inside of the bezel is darker when I color painted with permanent marker is so that I actually use the stone to test to see if there are any supposedly high spots or just extra metal that's preventing the stone from sitting at the height that I want it to be. And I usually set my center stones as low as possible just so that I have sufficient metal to move over the stone and then tighten it. This process, I just keep going until I'm at the height that I want it. And I'm probably at the possible 2-hour mark. Just setting the stone can take up to between 2 to 4 hours, and that depends on if the stone's at a different, unusual shape or not. And this one is a pretty standard emerald cut shape, so I just have to watch out for the bottom of the stone and all the corners and make sure that nothing's gonna, no extra metal's gonna hurt some of the facets, which are just all the flat spots on the stone. Whenever you're looking up prices for gemstones or diamonds, I guess just some friendly advice. Keep in mind that if the prices are just drastically lower than what I mentioned, that is going to be because all the jewelers have already picked through all the good quality gems already. And what they sell online are all the gems that have a bunch of flaws in them, such as they're called inclusions, which are just many kind of fractures and inside the gems to not so that it doesn't have as much clarity and color as they should. And sometimes they're even like photoshopped to make them look even better online than they are. And but I just wanted to let you know and for you to keep that in mind whenever you look up any gems that you might want to source out yourself. This is the part where I'm actually tightening the stone. And the tool I'm using is a steel rod where I'm pushing the bezel walls over the stone. Now to actually apply ample pressure, I'm using a small chasing hammer. It's probably difficult to tell, but the walls are slowly but surely moving over the stone. And I just keep going until the stone is not moving anymore. It's just perfectly still, and I don't have to worry about getting loose later on. I take my time with this part because the corners definitely need extra TLC because they can be the most fragile, especially stones that have points to them. That is especially have to take extreme precautions. I have tape to cover the stone to prevent any scratches from my file. I'm just removing some of the dents on the bezel, and that can happen from using my chasing hammer. Because tightening the stone and moving the bezel can be a very high pressure process. All I'm doing is just removing this tiny piece of metal from the gemstone and the bezel wall. Now this technique's super important when setting a bezel because it not only just goes along with the stone, which is what you want it to actually make it look like the stone is in the setting instead of separate. And it also polishes the inside. And this is the huge difference between a mediocre bezel setting versus a really nice professional one. Some bezel settings can look a bit rough, and that's mostly because they did not do this step. So at this stage, all I'm really doing is just sanding the inside just a little bit more right before I start polishing. And this is where I'm going to polish the ring, and I'm going to polish all the big areas first, and then I'm going to move on to the small areas. And I'm constantly checking to make sure there's no any like little scratches left. Almost all jewelry companies use this when they work on class rings. This black paint is called antiquing, and this is just for covering up all the silver in the background. And I have to keep applying because it's very thin. So basically, sometimes the silver starts showing, so I have to make sure to add a sufficient amount so that the whole background of it is dark. But I have to do it just a little bit at a time because if I add too much, it just gets really messy and it's going to be more difficult to remove the excess later. If I were to go back and redesign this ring, I probably would have raised the bottom up a little bit so that I didn't have to apply as much antiquing as I had to for this one. But for the most part, it turned out pretty good. So if you ever decide that you might want your own class ring, there are two ways of going about it. The first way is to go through the jewelry companies that just specialize in class rings. Now, they usually come to the high schools and already hand out catalogs and things like that. Now, the only thing is they already usually have a set design categories that you can just pick out. They don't always have, they're not super flexible on the type of gems and the font and things like that. The other way is to go to your local jeweler where they most likely will make a custom ring for you. And you may not necessarily want like the picture of the mask on your ring. You might pick out a certain activity you might like, and you can pick the type of metals you might want and all types of gems. So when you're looking for a jeweler, I would personally stay away from any that will charge by the hour, just because jewelers should know how long each project should take, and it should already be factored by the price. And that is how a class ring is made. I hope you all enjoyed my work, and I wish everybody a very good life. Even if some of you might be a bit down or struggling, just know, like my jewelry, life does take a lot of effort and a lot of time. But with patience and perseverance, they always come out shiny and brilliant, just like you all. Goodbye.